All right. Welcome to Backcountry BSing number 62.
Yeah, 62.
62 of
And boy,
these.
this is the one that we hyped.
Hey, I am very excited for this one.
Yes,
Andy
so
and I,
excited.
we spend a lot of time out in the woods, and we've heard some weird things. We've been trying to get a subject matter expert on this for a little bit.
Not just a bunch of people that go in the woods and be like, oh, I hear
Yeah,
stuff.
we want the science. So, real quick before we get to our guests of honor, remember to rate us on the iTunes store. I'm gonna say it every week. And then somewhat little announcement. We are probably in the next month or so, we are going to transition this podcast off of the Shill Brothers Outdoors podcast, and we are going to move it to its own YouTube channel.
Yep.
So it's become big enough now that it kind of needs its own home. So we are going to move the podcast. More to come on that, and obviously, we'll be doing tons of heads up for where you can go, and we're in the process of moving the whole backlog over, and that's in the process of happening. And when that becomes final, I'll let you all know. But we will have a dedicated Backcountry BSing podcast channel.
Right.
Nothing else about the podcast, like literally nothing will change. It will just have its own sort of home.
It'll allow us to do more fun stuff.
Yeah, we might do some more fun things with it, but it's gotten big enough to the point where it kind of needs its own home.
Yep.
And we don't want to just be spamming our main channel with just podcast stuff all the time. Yeah. So more to come on that. Like I said, we'll do more of an official announcement. We haven't really talked about it, but we will be kind of lifting and shifting, kind of a corporate word, over to the Backcountry BSing channel. So I think that's my only announcement.
That was a good announcement.
All right. So we are talking to the good doctor, as I'm calling him in my head now.
Yeah.
We are talking to Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum from Idaho State University. And he is, if you try and basically research anything that's like scientifically grounded in Sasquatch or Bigfoot, he comes up. I was very, very happy that you agreed to talk to us.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate it.
I didn't expect that. You've talked to a lot of people about this, and I was like, well, let's give it a shot and talk to him. And, I'm sure our audience will be interested.
Yeah.
But so before I start letting you talk, first off, I should give a little bio. He's a full professor at Idaho State University, professor of anthropology and anatomy, correct? I got that right? Okay.
Yep.
At Idaho State. And you've been effectively researching this since the 90s, right?
Yeah, 96. Just talking earlier today. Yeah, it's 25 years.
Wow. So I want to can you talk a little bit, before we just jump right into it, can you talk a little bit about how you got into this? I mean, did you grow up wanting to do this? How did you get to this?
Yeah, I hope it's not redundant for your listeners. I hope this is...
No. You're the most educated person that we've had on this.
Because obviously this is the typical lead-in question.
Oh, yes.
Comes to mind. I was intrigued by this topic from an early age. The first I heard of Bigfoot was back in 1968, just in the wake of Roger and Patterson and Bob Gimlin actually capturing that notorious 60 seconds of film footage. And they after they had shown it to a couple of scientific panels, one in British Columbia and one at the Smithsonian, they went on the public circuit, and one of their first stops was Spokane, Washington. And I was the kids at school were abuzz about the advertisement that came out in that morning's paper. And a couple of them had even seen some of the coverage in Reader's Digest. I think it picked up the story from Argosy. Anyway, that was my first introduction. And so, it just really embodied so many things that I found fascinating: human evolution and cavemen and primates, monkeys, and apes and King Kong and you name it, things like that. So plus all just the fascination. I mean, the film, if you were producing a film like that, you couldn't have really captured in any better way the feeling of actually being there in the forest, in that fall foliage and on that sandbar. on horseback to see this thing stride across that sandbar and disappear into the distance. And so one thing led to another, and so I had a very youthful interest. I was an obsessive collector of newspaper clippings and magazine articles, and there weren't many books on the topic at that time. There was Roger Patterson's book, which I acquired shortly after seeing the film, and then discovered John Green's On the Track of the Sasquatch. It turns out that John Green's niece was my librarian.
Oh, no way.
We discovered that years later when I gave my first presentation in Harrison Hot Springs and spent the weekend as the guest with the Greens, and that was funny. But I did a 6th grade report on Bigfoot.
Oh,
and so on. That
No way.
Full interest waxed and waned over the years, but eventually, all those interests that were embodied in that topic and in that creature walking across the film sort of guided my my path, the educational path, and I ended up pursuing a degree in anatomical science with an emphasis in physical anthropology, specializing in adaptations for bipedalism. So I was in a rather singular position, given my interests and given the training that I had received.
Yeah.
And so that when I came up face to face with a set of 15-inch tracks in southeastern Washington, it really blew my mind. I mean, by that time, I was really quite sober about the topic. I was objective. I was quite critical of a lot of the evidence and a lot of the claims that were out there. And you have to ask Matt Moneymaker. As I kind of got pulled back into this topic, and was online, Matt and I sparred a lot because I took exception to some of his claims. I still do, actually. But anyway, it was I was very skeptical, very, very, but open-minded. I mean, I was intrigued, and the evidence spoke for itself.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there kind of pinching myself. It was actually Paul Freeman, who may be known to some of your viewers for all of the involvement he had over the years. But it was Paul Freeman that actually took me out and showed me these tracks, which he had found that very morning.
Wow.
And I'm kneeling there looking at all the signs of animation, the tension cracks, the pressure ridges, the slide ins, the toe curl and splay in other instances, and so forth. And even dermatoglyphics, even skin ridge detail in this fine silty mud. And I'm pinching myself thinking, how did he do this? I mean, that was still that was the first thought that came to me. How did he pull this off? How did he make these? So, and the more I looked, and then Paul literally read the whole scene backwards. He had it totally misinterpreted what had transpired. My brother and I went back after taking Paul home, and we went back and very carefully marked out each footprint and recreated what had happened. And Paul had it absolutely backwards from, as far as where it came from, where it disappeared, and where the tracks, were no longer evident.
So, I'm just curious. So you, first off, it's very rare to talk to someone who's currently doing like what their childhood passion was. So I think that's very cool.
Yes.
I think that's very cool. So, you were kind of, you saw this as a youth, and it really kind of charged you, and then you got into graduate school. Just as someone who was in grad school, was your advisor like, this dude wants to study Bigfoot, or like, did that guide you? Like, did you find someone?
It was quite latent at that time period, through that period, very, very dormant. It was only when after I had come, I landed this position at Idaho State University, got closer to my roots back in the Rocky Mountains in Pacific Northwest, that an opportunity opened itself to look into this question. It first came through the International Society of Cryptozoology, which is now unfortunately defunct, but was run at the time by Richard Greenwell, and he reached out to me. I actually reached out to him, and I was pursuing one of the things that had distracted me from hominin bipedalism was the opportunity to study the locomotor adaptations of New World fossil primates, platyrrhines, and And so I had the chance to go down to Colombia and Argentina and actually dig fossils and identify new species, for the first time and so forth. Really fun. But I was following up on a report of these giant primates in South America, Lois's ape, and the Mono Grande, and too long to tell the whole backstory on that, but that had prompted me to get in touch with Richard Greenwell, who had published an interesting article in his journal written by some explorers, some adventurers, if you will, that went down in pursuit of this story. I was after the photograph. Anyway, a couple months later, Richard calls me up and said, "Hey, we've got a piece of video evidence of Bigfoot, alleged evidence from Northern California. Would you be interested to evaluate it?" I thought, hey, sure.
Yeah.
Be interesting. I mean, literally at that point, the interest was dormant enough.
Yeah.
And actually my skepticism, because so much time had elapsed, over the years with nothing apparently resolved. And I didn't know a lot of the backstory to a lot of this evidence, which I now am quite intimately familiar with. But so I thought, it'll be a fun exercise. I'll apply my skills and I'll point out the obvious zipper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Right.
was literally my approach. And the more I looked, I failed. I could not see a zipper. And I started noticing interesting little details, like the way the foot flexed across the midfoot. My first inkling of a mid-tarsal break in the Sasquatch foot. There was some people had a real heyday with this, but there was what appeared to be a genital display, a primate-like genital display. This creature, this apparently, if we can assume this was real for the moment, was quite taken aback by the approach of this well lit RV. I mean, you can imagine it'd be like it'd be like a UFO landing on the highway.
Yeah.
You'd be rather terrified. And in response, this creature had an erection, but it wasn't a human. It wasn't a human-looking erection.
I am not familiar with this piece of evidence.
I haven't seen this video.
I know, yeah. Well, this is the Sex and the Sasquatch.
Yeah, that's what they call it.
But I'm telling you, I mean, to be matter of fact, went up to the bookshelf and pulled down a volume of Jane Goodall's Chimpanzees of the Gombe, just flipped a few pages, and there was a chimpanzee displaying to another chimpanzee, a dominant display. And it was identical to what was on the video. Now, what were the chances of somebody in a costume or somebody creating the costume mimicking something like that?
Right.
Be audacious enough to incorporate that anatomical detail, but to get it just right for a non-human primate.
Right.
So that was intriguing. Anyway, that set the ball kind of rolling. I can't remember now what your
my question was like, how, from an academic standpoint, like how did you get into this? Okay. And I didn't think we get to Bigfoot's dick this early in the podcast, but that's okay.
I have a question though. So, like in your book, it's often referred to as Sasquatch, and then Bigfoot's thrown around too. Is there a more acceptable term? Is Sasquatch more acceptable than Bigfoot?
It just depends on who you're talking
to.
Bigfoot has become so tainted, if you will, or tied to the tabloid reputation that, especially in my circles, early on, I tried to cultivate the use of the word Sasquatch because it was more acknowledging of the Native American tradition. And it was really kind of more descriptive in a way.
Right.
The wild man of the woods. That's a theme that carries all around the globe. And now I use quite frequently the words or the term relic hominoid. I can talk to my colleagues about the prospect of the survival of some of the lineages on this very bushy hominoid tree, or hominin tree, to be more specific. But if I say Sasquatch, then, or Bigfoot, then it's like, oh no.
And you bring up something I wanted to talk to you about. how much has the sensationalism of Bigfoot like hampered your ability to put forth actual scientific evidence? I mean, has that,
A lot.
has that hurt a lot?
It's a stigma that, basically in the 60s when Roger presented his film, I mean, that was the first time that a convention of scientific individuals with credentials viewed some evidence like this, and when they dropped it like a hot potato, and there are reasons for that. I mean, in my opinion, there are some contextual reasons why the science of that day could not accommodate the anthropological science.
Okay.
Very narrow, could not accommodate the prospect of another bipedal hominin. There was no space for it. I mean, at that time, anthropology, and I'm getting off track, but at that time, anthropology was laboring under an erroneous paradigm that of one species per one niche. And that rule holds as long as you understand the niche. But the anthropologists had painted the hominin niche so narrowly that they could only accommodate one at any time. So human evolution was seen as this single file march, one species being succeeded by a more derived or more adapted species and so forth, but never multiple. And it was only in the 70s that as the fossil record began to grow, that there was a recognition that, hey, there was more than one species at a given time. It wasn't a lodgepole pine, it was a bushy bush.
Yeah.
Lots of branches.
I remember I read the book Sapiens, and they talk a lot about that. And that was something that it's insane to think about, not to get off of Bigfoot, but the fact that there were different, I mean, I guess you could call them different species of hominids at the same time.
Well, it's very pertinent to the subject of Bigfoot, because that's the point is back then, see, they looked at the Patterson-Gimlin film and they go, I mean, they weren't evaluating it objectively.
Right.
In their minds, it couldn't exist.
Yeah.
Therefore, what can we point to illustrate that this is a hoax? And so you got these really silly remarks. Silly, since we got the male genitalia, let's go to the female. There was this ridiculous remark about the breasts. One of these anthropologists said, all primate breasts are free of hair. And yet here we've got this, not only were these hoaxers audacious enough to put breasts on it, but they put hair on the breasts. Well, this is embarrassing not only to the discipline, but to the gender.
Yeah, right.
Our gender, because, all you have to do is recognize if there's a goosebump, if there's a goosebump, that means there's a little erector pili muscle, the little muscle attached to the base of a hair shaft. So fine as it might be, doesn't take much experience in the world to recognize that humans and other primates do have hair.
Right.
In their breasts. So remarks like that were just inane. And then, someone says, well, look, it's a female. It is portraying a female with the presence of the breasts, but it walks like a man. Well, why does it walk like a man? Because human females walk differently than human males, because they give birth to big-brained babies that require a large birth canal, which moves the hips apart, so that when they walk, there's a greater tilt to the pelvis with each step. Okay, there's a simple biomechanical explanation for that. And of course, the Marilyn Monroes or whoever, they exaggerate that as a sexual signal of distinction of gender. But if this creature has a small cranial capacity, this species, I should say, to be quite clear, has an adult brain that is on the order of, say, a gorilla, they don't have the obstetric constraints of the pelvis. And so the male and female pelvis are more similar in size. Ergo, it walks like a male.
That's interesting.
That just points out that those kinds of statements are just, in hindsight, are not only inane, but they're, like I said, they're embarrassing to the discipline, that these were the experts of the time and they make comments like that, And so now we have to ask, why haven't we discovered some more persistent branches on this bushy hominin tree? And in the face of so much evidence to suggest there's Sasquatch, there's maybe a Yeti, there's maybe a Neanderthal-like Russian almas, maybe there's a little Australopithecine called the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis.
Yeah.
So
talk about that.
So there's all these possibilities, and so to say they can't exist, anyone who says that now is just simply ignorant.
Yeah.
I mean, put it as plain as you can. They don't understand the science. Now it comes down to the possibility, not the possibility, the probability. What's the probability that such creatures have avoided our acknowledgement all these, millennia? And then that's where then you weigh the evidence. But you acknowledge that there could be evidence. See, this is the thing. We had Michael Shermer, one of the
nice
skeptics, come to campus.
Yeah,
he's a big skeptic.
Spoke, and I had a chance to visit with him on one of the occasions. But just to show how if we talk about lack of background knowledge, he's coming to. He wasn't talking about Bigfoot. He was coming to talk about critical thinking and skepticism. But of course, the favorite punching bag, the straw man, and especially on this campus, he had never read my book. He even had the courtesy to listen to my book before the interview. He hadn't.
I did.
And again,
there you go. You're better than Michael Shermer.
Not bragging about my book, but if you were going to be informed on the topic, don't you think that you should have read the only book written by a bona fide anthropologist, anatomist on the subject?
Yeah,
I would think so.
Yes.
And what's his mantra?
Yeah,
science starts when you have a body. That's
what
the most unscientific.
Yeah.
What
I was very surprised by the book, and I really liked the way that you approached it by
first we should say the link to the book is in the description right now. So check it out. Check it out if you're interested in this stuff, and it is a scientific approach to this subject, which we love.
I really like how almost your chapters focused on certain topics, and then you would explain I don't know, I don't want to say, you would explain what it is and then go into great detail about why this could be plausible and what type of science is out there to support these claims. And I some of that stuff I've never even considered ever.
What is if I had to say, so here's my approach to this. I'm open to anything, right?
Yeah, me too.
I was a scientist for 10 years, and that's why I was drawn to you, because you're an actual scientist. And the sensationalism has definitely done something. For instance, if none of this Bigfoot stuff or Yeti stuff ever existed, and 5 years from now, your lab was like, hey, we found remnants of this species of hominid that existed at some point. We just never found it. I'd be like, that makes total sense. That makes sense that could happen.
Yeah.
But there's so much sensationalism that now it's oh man, there's a lot of crazies. But to you, to someone like me, what is the best piece of evidence that you got?
It's the footprints.
I mean, is there anything other than footprints?
Well, not to trivialize footprints, because that was going to be my answer, obviously, is and granted, I'm certainly biased. I mean, that's my expertise, and I see things. I appreciate the significance of that evidence more so maybe than someone less initiated. I think the presence of hair that we can't attribute to other forms of wildlife. I mean, there's only there are primates have a distinctive type of hair. Most fur-bearing mammals, not all, but most fur-bearing mammals, fur is differentiated because it has guard hairs, the stiffer, longer guard hairs that provide mechanical sort of protection. And then it has the finer under fur that provides insulative quality. But primates have just a modified type of guard hair, just like our body hair. Chimpanzee has essentially not much more hair per unit of area of skin than we do. It's just longer and a bit slightly coarser. But So that's an important piece of evidence. I think, unfortunately, the photographic evidence is a real grab bag of in quality and quantity. The Patterson-Gimlin films set the bar so high and out of reach of unfortunately every other approximation. I mean, there's a few that are intriguing as well. In my book, we focused the documentary focused on the Freeman footage and the Memorial Day footage, which is less. Freeman footage is actually quite intriguing. And it's backed up, just as the Patterson film is, it's corroborated with footprint evidence.
Yeah.
Patterson, they actually got a couple of frames that had footprints in the film. And then, of course, he cast a right and a left at the site. And then other witnesses came. Bob Titmus came and cast 10 in succession, regardless of their quality, which made a very interesting and informative sampling of the footprint evidence there. If all I had were the footprints from the Patterson-Gimlin film site, I would be quite confident in its authenticity. But having both, being able to see the foot that actually left the track, and see the dynamic, the kinematic of how that transpired, just nails it. But likewise, see the Patterson or the Freeman footage, when Freeman first arrives at the site where he'd been tipped off that someone else had seen footprints, he films some of the tracks in the dust. And this individual that left those about 15-inch tracks had a very distinctive toe configuration. The second and third toe were a bit longer than the first and the fourth, and nearly equal in length with one another. In humans, we call that a Morton's toe, and it only occurs in about a couple percent of the population. It's not uncommon to have a second toe longer than the first toe, but usually then there's a step gradient. Well, that's a fairly distinctive trait, and the tracks I had seen in 1996 exhibited that trait. In fact, what you see on the Patterson, on the Freeman footage may be the individual who left the tracks that I witnessed in 96.
Oh, interesting.
So
they're that similar.
When you look at, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and that's the one disadvantage of listening to the book.
Yeah.
Is that there's like 150 figures.
I know.
I'm a very visual teacher and learner.
True.
So you don't get the benefit of all of the
That's true. You couldn't just read it.
No. I'm just saying that there's a figure in the book that shows a juxtaposition of these casts that show that individual is almost certainly the one in the film.
I have a question though.
Hold on, I have a question too.
Okay.
So over the years, I mean, you've observed and you've captured certain footprints. I mean, are there standard consistencies amongst all the different sets of footprints that are caught? Yes. Okay.
Right. That was one of the things I was, when I kind of undertook this, it was, if your exposure is limited to a few newspaper clippings and a few, this was in the age before internet, obviously, and all the YouTube videos and whatnot online, but you couldn't help but come away with the impression that every footprint was kind of unique. It was kind of distinct and singular. Well, when you get a large enough sample and you understand the underlying anatomy, there were some characteristics that started to emerge that showed, even in tracks that, to the untrained eye, you might say, these look completely different. In fact, a famous researcher, Rene de Hinden, got hung up on this because he for him, the Patterson-Gimlin film site tracks were the gold standard.
Yeah.
And that individual had a sole pad that extended fairly far up under the toes. So when the toes were curled, you kind of had peas in the pod toe pads and apparently short, stubby toes.
Sorry, we got some feedback that we're frozen, but you're not frozen. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, you're frozen?
I'm frozen, but you're good. So
okay.
He's fixing
You want me to keep talking?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We're
good. He held that up as a gold standard. So when he investigated some of Paul Freeman's evidence, where individuals in that region had less webbing up under the toes. The toes had longer stems, visible stems. He referred to them as sausage toes, and wrote them off as fake. Well, if you knew the correlates of the underlying skeletal anatomy, it was very clear that actually the toes were the same size. That the Patterson print has a little indentation in the ball of, and some tracks even show a crease running across. Well, that crease is just like in the palm of your hand, where the palm tissue extends further past the knuckle, and so it throws up a flexion crease when that knuckle bends. Well, almost each and every one of us is born with such a flexion crease. If you look at your birth certificate, your little inked footprint, you'll notice there's a crease right across the ball of your foot.
Yeah.
And that only fills in as the connective tissue of the ball differentiates and elaborates, and it fills in that tissue. People that have flexible arches, like one of my boys, still has the crease right across his foot. Looks like a Bigfoot track. Only his foot's not that long. So yes, to your question, there is a common thread. There's a common morphology that's present, but not absolutely glaringly obvious to the uninformed or uncredentialed in foot morphology. Another thing that's very compelling to me about the footprints is, one of the questions I asked is, if these creatures exist, they must be very rare, right? There can't be herds of them.
Right.
They're very rare. And so if footprints are found in a given area, given region over a period of time, the chances that those discovered footprints are from one of a very few individuals is very high. So we should see repeat appearances of recognizable individuals. No one had demonstrated that. And so I started looking for evidence of that, and boom, immediately started finding. I found examples. It was asserted that Patty's footprints were rather unique, had never been seen before or after. Not true. There's a half a dozen different instances. It's just that they don't look the same, because she might be walking on a hard logging road in the dust versus the soft, compliant, wet sand of that sandbar. But the famous 1958 Jerry Crew footprint that was emblazoned on the headlines, the newspaper front pages, that individual was also seen at Heim Palm in 62, and cast by Roger Patterson at Bluff Creek in 1963 or 64. There's some discrepancy on the date that's come up, so I always have to qualify that. 64 is what he put in his book. But anyway, we have examples of that one, which I think was the big alpha male in the area.
Yeah.
That as an adult, spanning probably a good 15, 20 years residency.
Can we talk a little bit too about the just the evidence of primates in the Americas in general?
Sure.
And
people often bring up, there's no. Well, there is a fossil record of primates that goes way back. You have to go back to the Eocene, at a time when the tropical climates extended all the way up into southern Canada, and there were little lemur-like primates, prosimian primates, that precede the monkeys even, and in organization and in evolutionary history. Those went extinct as there was a dramatic climate shift at the Eocene-Oligocene boundary, and the globe started cooling and drying, and those tropics receded back down to where they are today. So they went extinct. But at that time, all the way up into Alberta, Canada, there are fossils of these little lemur-like primates in the forests, in the tropical forests. There's not a record of apes in North America, however, monkeys or apes. And so, it is, if one then asks, well, where would a giant hairy ape come from? Well, it had to come across the Bering Land Bridge from Asia, as did so many other mammals.
That makes sense. Yeah.
people don't realize that 75% of the mammals that are common to North America actually evolved in Asia and came across.
Right, came over.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What? So first, I gotta apologize to the viewers. Our video feed froze.
Not sure why.
You're good. Dr. Meldrum's still on the. I don't know what the deal with our streaming setup is. There might be an issue. I'm not gonna mess with it now. The audio is still good.
Yeah.
My question was. So do you know who Survivor Man is? Les Stroud. Have you ever heard of him?
Course.
Yeah. So he told a story once on a podcast, like literally years ago.
From Alaska.
He was in Alaska and he was talking about this crazy like primal sound he heard at night. But my question was like, other than the video footage, what is like the most compelling firsthand account that like you've heard of?
Patterson Gimlin.
But
Well,
I mean,
whenever I'm asked that, the one that comes to mind, and it's because of the opportunity to really get to know the witness and hear the story.
Yeah.
It's and I'm not sure. I don't think she minds her name, but I'm having a senior moment anyway, so we'll leave it anonymous. Her name will pop back into my head here in any second, but
there is like there is someone.
Yes.
Like
so this woman was quite the outdoors woman and an amateur naturalist. She was a very credible woman. She worked in a law firm, and she had put herself through law school by teaching music. She was a musician.
Oh wow!
And so she taught music lessons. She performed. She did storytelling and so forth. And realized after 10 years or so in this law firm that this wasn't the life she really wanted.
Oh, nice.
She was able to make a living doing what she really loved and being where she really liked to be. She, I mean, just to show you what a stalwart outdoors woman she was, she hiked the entire Continental Divide Trail.
Nice.
Colorado solo, just with a couple of goats, pack goats along. She was a pack goater, and or a goat packer. Maybe that's the proper.
I don't know if there's a correct term for it.
Yeah.
In any case, on one of her trips, she had a couple goats and she had a couple dogs along with her. She said even on that remote trail, she was bumping into more people than she really wanted to at that particular time. So she decided to take a break and go off trail. She noticed on her map some off trail lakes and nice meadowy area. And so she hiked several miles off trail to that spot. Along the way, the dogs kept reacting to something in the trees and bristling and so forth. The goats are also very attentive. It's like llamas, goats, they make great watchdogs.
Yeah.
If they hear something or smell something, they zero in on it. You can just watch their eyes. Well, she got in, she set up her camp. She had the goats unpacked and everything and was feeding them. And the dogs kept barking off at she thought a bear maybe had been shadowing her. This is in an area of southern Colorado where they still have the ghost grizzlies. The mysterious grizzlies are supposedly extinct but keep on showing up again.
Yeah, we've heard about those too.
As well as black bear.
Yeah.
And so she didn't want the dogs to tangle. She pulls them into the tent. She grabs a can of pepper spray and steps out, expecting maybe to confront a bear, because as she went to step out, she saw that the goats had crowded up right to the entrance of the tent. And so she steps out, turns around. Standing right behind her tent was an 8.5 foot tall Bigfoot.
Oh,
what? 3 o'clock in the afternoon, broad daylight.
Wow.
And she just froze, and it was looking at her, and she was looking at it. And she said it would glance every now and then down at the goats, like it thought these looked odd, wasn't familiar with them. But she said she even commented that there was a moment when she had this, and what she didn't claim it was mind speak or parapsychological, but just the impression of that you get with any animal when their body posture changes, and it's like, I won't hurt you if you won't hurt me.
Right.
And she said it just kind of softened the edges. And at that point, a second one peeked out around from behind.
Wait, okay. Let's recap this. So this is an ex-lawyer is hiking the Continental Divide Trail
section through Colorado. Solo with goats.
Do you know like when did this happen?
Let me think. And her name is Julie Davis.
Okay. All right. Andy's Googling her right now.
Her story actually was featured. The Denver Post let their environmental correspondent do a 2-page spread on Sasquatch in Colorado. And he almost backed out, but the fellow pressed him a bit further and got it. And it was summarily ignored. It was just ignored. That's one of the strategies. Either you vehemently criticize something that you want when you want to discredit it, or you just ignore it as if it doesn't even exist. That's the tack most common around campus now. I mean, I'm kind of tolerated now much more than I was 10 years ago, but now it's just we won't even distinguish it, give it distinction by acknowledging it, basically.
That's something I want to get to later in this podcast, but this is a crazy story to me.
Wait,
and did she come, like, how did you find out about this? This was
because
obviously in the news.
She's good friends with a colleague of mine because of her goat packing.
Okay.
She is good friends with a person I work with in the field, John Mayenzinski, who essentially invented goat packing, or at least standardized it, commercial goat packing in the United States. So they were good friends and well acquainted and had been on lots of trips with clients together and so forth. And so he introduced me to her when we decided to do some work down in Colorado to look into some of the reports down there.
So this was 2003, I think Andy pulled it. Because I was like,
sounds about right.
Because I was like, we got smartphones, people. Take a picture.
Yeah.
But this was before that. So I was like, damn.
The article was written by Theo Stein.
Okay.
Theo Stein. And it was, a fantastic 2-page spread, which featured her experience. At first, she was going to remain anonymous, and they were going to change up the details just enough that she wouldn't be recognizable. But then the Wallace story broke. Ray Wallace and his death, and the claims by his family that they had used carved wooden feet to fake all these footprints.
Yeah.
That broke, and that created such a brouhaha that Julie said, "Hey, go back and rewrite the story and put my name in it. I'm going to stand with my story, because this was not a fake. I saw them. I know they exist. They're real, and people need to know that." So her story ran.
So was there any?
So like I said, I've heard her tell it, in her front room and across a campfire, and been able to ask her questions about it. And you can see the physical change, that the physical impact that the experience had on her at the time, as she relives it.
Wow.
Telling it. And, it's one thing to sit in your armchair and poo-poo an eyewitness. And you have to take eyewitness testimony with a huge grain of salt. But when you come to know the person, their skills, their knowledgeability, they're very knowledgeable of natural history and so forth. It puts it in a whole different category.
Did anybody ever go up to that spot and try to locate tracks or anything?
No, it was extremely remote, and it would be, kind of difficult. It's hard to find tracks. I always press witnesses myself with that kind of question, but while also acknowledging, either verbally or implicitly, there's a lot of terrain out there that just will not take a footprint, especially not the footprint of a soft padded foot without hooves or claws to make imprints. So No, she hasn't. She has sat down with a sketch artist.
Yeah, I saw some of the
Andy was
sketches.
pulling that up. Yeah,
Travers.
yeah.
Pete Travers has quite a project, and you might be able to find him online, where he has done sketches of a lot of different eyewitness descriptions. They're interesting to see.
Looks like Chewbacca a little bit.
It does a little bit.
Yeah.
And you know, that's the state. You have to. You always have to take sketch artists' work with a grain of salt, too, because they tend to incorporate some of their own stylistic expression.
Yeah.
So one thing with Pete, you know, I kind of I don't know if I've ever criticized him to his face, but I've mentally criticized some of his sketches or drawings. They often look kind of blockish and rather short hind legs, lower legs, or legs versus upper extremity.
Yeah.
Till I saw a picture he drew with a Sasquatch standing next to a person, and the person was kind of blockish, disproportionately short.
That's pretty funny.
It was just the way he drew.
That's pretty funny.
So.
But in your eyes, this is like a good, like this is an eyewitness account that like you think is really legit based on what you know.
I mean, it's above reproach. She's above reproach.
Yeah.
And then you have that combined with excellent circumstances of observation. You know, for a lot of people, their glimpse is extremely fleeting, and it's just a flash of fur, and so that's why it sometimes is easy to overinterpret. You know, I was out with a group one time, and we flushed a black bear.
Right.
It went galloping away, but most of us only caught just a glimpse of it. And if you wanted to have a Bigfoot experience, that would have been the seed.
Yeah, for sure.
A flash of black fur just disappearing in the brush and the bushes wagging in at its passing. But she saw it in broad daylight, literally a distance of about 15 feet. If you can imagine, 15 feet looking up into the eyes of an 8.5 foot tall Sasquatch.
I couldn't imagine.
How intelligent? Let's say they're there, they're out there. Like, how intelligent do you think they are based on what you know of like your anthropological facts of hominids and what you think they're like? How intelligent do you think they are?
Well, I think the evidence is in the lack of material culture. They have there is no archaeological, you talk about fossil record of primates in North America.
Right.
There's no archaeological record of a primitive hominin in North America. There's no stone artifacts other than those of the Clovis people and pre-Clovis and so forth. I mean, all Homo sapiens. So there's that. There's nothing, no evidence of fire. There's no evidence of home bases, other than nests, equivalent to what we see other primates, other great apes make. There's questionable evidence of language, and I emphasize the questionable, debatable evidence of language. There's what else? Everything about them. It just their size. The depth and massiveness of their jaws. I mean, it all suggests an adaptation that is not dependent on stone or wood tools, but rather on brute strength, basically.
So, like, not
chewing strength.
Not super intelligent. Is that what you're trying to say?
I would put them on par with the great apes, or early hominins. The early hominins like the Australopithecines, or the Paranthropines, the robust forms, that also show a lack. Although now some archaeological evidence has attributed simple flake tools, cutting flakes, to Australopithecines. Even as early as that, they could knock off a sharp flake and use it to shave open or cut open a hide, or shave off a tendon or tissue from bone, say. And they had brains that were barely bigger than chimps or gorillas, maybe 10% bigger, 50 cc's bigger. And You know, it's like I jokingly sometimes make the point. I show a picture of a depiction of a Cro-Magnon with all his gear, his kit, you know, stone knife, and they've even prematurely given him a bow and arrow in this particular uh, 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 painting. But then I put up a picture of Patty from the Patterson-Gimlin film, and there's nothing.
Yeah.
It's like George Carlin's shtick. You know, where's the stuff? Well, not our stuff. When we go on a trip, we pick our most necessary favorite stuff and we take it with us and we unpack it. And then if we go off to the beach, we have to subdivide our stuff. And, you know, we just can't get around without surrounding ourselves with stuff.
What is, and this might be something that is discussed in your book, what is the range? Like, do we have these in the Midwest potentially? Like what is the geographical range?
Well, if you watch some of the documentaries, they would have you believe that they've appeared in every state.
Yes, that's why I asked this. And we have an Ohio Bigfoot group too that's watching. So like, what, in your expert opinion, you know, it's out there, it exists. Like, right. What's the geographical range?
Well, my rule of thumb, and I think it holds, and it has basis also or corroboration in an interesting published paper. Let me give the backstory of the paper real quickly. A friend of mine who is he's a GIS technician, Geographic Information Systems, and together with a couple of his colleagues, he's very into Sasquatch. He did his senior honors thesis on a geospatial analysis of the distribution of Sasquatch reports in the Pacific Northwest over a 20-year period.
Oh, wow.
And demonstrated the influence of the growth of the Puget Sound metropolitan area on the distribution of reports. Got an A+ on it, shared it. And then he landed a plum of a job at the Esri Center, and now he does private consulting work. But he and a couple co-authors had written an editorial for a biogeography journal, cautioning about the misuse of ecological modeling software packages. You know, if you just treat them like a black box and you don't know what the algorithms are doing, then, you know, for all you know, it's garbage in, garbage out. You got to know what's going on. Yeah. And so to demonstrate the potential pitfalls, he and his co-authors said they undertook to test an ostensibly bogus data set. And guess what it was? It was the data that he'd used.
Oh, really?
For his honors thesis, basically. It was Bigfoot data.
That's
but
pretty
what
funny.
Came out was remarkably rational and coherent model of the bioclimatic factors that define the Bigfoot range. And it aligned remarkably closely with that of black bear.
Oh, interesting.
So,
okay.
Yeah, which you might expect, another large omnivore.
Yeah.
You know, but they, in order to get the paper published, they had to kind of tongue-in-cheek say, well, obviously there's the explanation for Sasquatch, that it's just misidentified
It's
bear
just
sites.
black bears. Yeah.
Yeah, black bears. Well, I called him up and I said, Peter, what happened? Did you do an about face? And he goes, no, Jeff, you should recognize, in the theme of our earlier conversation, you should recognize more than anyone that had we even suggested the possibility that our data actually indicated the existence of a Sasquatch, it would never have been published.
Yeah.
So we had to kind of couch it,
dumb it down.
Said, but my two co-authors, who were very skeptical, are now very intrigued. In fact, I'm reading the book. So my rule of thumb is pull up, and you can Google online, just look up black bear distribution in North America. There's a really great map. There's one actually that has the historical distribution and the current distribution, even down to actual sightings in isolated areas. But if you look at the distribution of black bear, not just in the Northwest, but across North America, it aligns remarkably well with credible, substantiated Sasquatch reports. You know, not in the middle, in the wheat fields of Kansas.
Right.
Desert, you know, not in Central Park, New York City, Manhattan,
But New Jersey.
But hey,
loaded.
hey, hey, Buckeye Bigfoot hunters, he's telling
That's right.
you
Oh,
there's a chance.
Down the backside of the Appalachia.
Yeah.
They come down across the Great Lakes and the backside of the Appalachia, all the way down. It kind of button hooks up into the deep south, up to the Four Corners area, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana. There's even, there's even been a few bear sightings. I was just talking to a friend in Nebraska.
Oh wow, they got them there.
Well, yeah. Well, there's very few black bear. They're just up over. Most of them are on the very eastern side in the riverine forested areas on the east part of the state, not out in the Great Plains, really. Although, and then you have to qualify that, because with any species with a specific habitat limitation, there's going to be emigration, moving. The young adults that grow up, the dominant male's going to push them out,
right?
Especially young males. And they're going to have to strike out on their own. Dr. Krantz talked about this in his book, what he called rogue males. And he attributed what seemed, seemingly out of place sightings that didn't make a lot of sense as just transients who were looking for their own stomping grounds or biding their time until they got, buffed up enough that they could challenge a male and displace him and usurp some territory. Themselves as a possible explanation. So but again, it kind of boils down a rule of thumb. I tell people, when they say, oh yeah, we see them here all the time, I say, well, do you have black bear? Well, no, there haven't been black bear here for 100 years. Well, if the habitat's that altered, and the human growth and development is that extensive that black bears can't survive, do you really think, a community or a population of Sasquatch can survive?
So
need to look, don't just realize too that state boundaries are artificial.
Right.
And so sometimes, like with Nebraska, you see just a little bit there in Nebraska, but if you look to the other side, there could be a lot more habitat that just barely laps over that state line. And so that increases the odds too.
So something I wanted to ask as well, and then once again, this could very well be discussed in the book, but is there evidence, or do you think, and you kind of hinted to it, that they're social? I mean, I know apes are social animals, but like, are they communal? Are they social? Is that something?
Right.
Like, what do you think about that?
Certain, but we have some clues.
Yeah.
And the clues are that most sightings and most footprint finds are of solitary individuals, or what we interpret as a female with offspring in tow. There are some exceptions to that. Like people say, well, what about the Ostman story, the Ostman incident? There was a male, what it was taken to be interpreted as an adult male, an adult female, and a juvenile male and female. Well, it's interesting though, but when Ostman was abducted, it was presumably just the male that kept visiting his camp repeatedly. So that male was not hanging out with that female and her offspring at the time that he was abducted, and the time that they left that little box canyon, they usually left separately and they came back separately, often bringing different resources. He talks about the female coming in one time carrying, I think she had the arm of sweetgrass that they ate, and one of them came back with strips of bark one time. So they were coming back with different resources. So it may be that maybe they do coalesce. See, chimpanzees have a fission fusion.
Yeah.
Where when they're out dispersed foraging, they are more dispersed, but then they come back together for security and sleep together, sleep in the trees together. Gorillas have a harem where the male defends the females. Orangutans, what's interesting, the diversity, that no two apes have the same social structure.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Even the bonobos are different than the common chimps. But the orangutans, the male defends a territory. He doesn't defend a harem. He defends a territory that overlaps the home range. They don't defend territory, the home range of females with offspring. When the females are receptive, they seek out the biggest, baddest guy on the block, the male. And that's only about every 5 to 7 years that they become receptive to dinner and dancing.
Right.
They have quite a birth interval.
What is their birth interval? Like, what do you surmise that it is? Is it close to like a 9-month?
I mean, again, this isn't even a surmise. This is total speculation.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, fair.
But the potential parallels, I think, between orangutans and Bigfoot are the best. I think a dominant male will defend a territory, or well, you can't even. It's been pointed out to me repeatedly by mammalogists. You can't defend 1,000 square miles.
Right.
That kind of seems to be what they're. All you can do is advertise your presence. Well, how do Sasquatch vocalize? Isn't it interesting that one of the most commonly reported vocalization is this long, loud, piercing scream? That's what characterizes the orangutan, is their loud call, where the male broadcasts his presence. And he has these interesting air sacs to augment that. The big dewlap you see under the chin of the orang, that's a big air sac from a diverticulum from the larynx. They even have them down underneath the skin of the chest, even under the pec muscle. It's like a bagpipe. They can squeeze on that. I mean, not only does it provide resonation, but they can squeeze on that, and it can force more air, either depending on where they join, either above or below the vocal cords. But even if it's above, they can vocalize with the modulation of their pharynx, even supralaryngeal.
So is the sound? Is it a scream
that Sasquatch make?
Yeah.
Some are high pitched wailing. It's like a banshee cry. Others are the hooting sound, the whoop whoop.
So not that I think this is a Sasquatch, but Andy and I, we've talked about this on this podcast many times, but there's a part of Southern Ohio that, butts up against Appalachia.
Yeah.
And we hear these sounds. I don't know what they are, but they're like banshee screaming sounds. It's an area of Wayne National Forest. And we just hear these sounds all the time. And I don't know. We don't know. We have literally on this podcast live played like every animal sound we can think of, and we haven't found what it is. I don't know. I obviously am not saying it's a Sasquatch, but if that's the sound it would make, is some sort of like guttural screaming sound.
Probably, yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, and it may include infrasonic elements, and that's another idea about
interesting.
The resonating chambers. It helps with the production of infrasound, like like the drone on a bike.
Yeah, right. Is there any evidence or anything whatsoever that suggests that these things, would potentially be hostile towards us?
I used to always answer that immediately, say, "Oh no, that's really not." And give.
I wanted you to say that.
Well, it's like when most of the accounts involve bluffing behavior.
Yeah,
interesting.
Like a bear.
Are akin to what Diane Fossey described the first time a silverback bluff charge.
Yeah.
And but having said that, the Native American traditions are rife with examples of cannibal giants. Cannibal because they eat people, not because they eat each other, but because they eat people and children. The eater of children is one of the names, even here locally. And there are stories of children being snatched.
Really?
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Stories. I mean,
it's in the book. You got.
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This has been like 9 days in the making. I didn't have time to take out a book. Andy did. I was like, at least one of us consumed the book. So
this is what's really fascinating. As I was writing that part of the book, one of my friends, good friend, acquaintance, was in the Peace Corps. Owen Caddy was his name. He was in the Peace Corps, and in Africa, he stayed on and worked with the game warden in the game warden service there at one of the national parks. They had an incident outside the park where a woman had parked her infant in the shade of the bushes there while she was just a few steps off hoeing in the field. and well, maybe a little more than a few steps, because along comes a chimpanzee
Oh,
and snatched up the baby and made off with it. Before they could retrieve it, it had been dispatched and partially consumed by
so that
this
behavior exists in the primate
Yes.
spectrum. Okay.
Right. Exactly. And so, and what was even more than compelling was, I mean, this was just an anecdote, but then some months later, there was actually a paper, a news item published, and I don't think it was a paper written on it, but I think it's been discussed since. But in the news item, they acknowledged that over a 7-month period, there were a dozen cases of toddlers or infants snatched by chimpanzees with severe drought conditions, and the chimps were getting food where they could find it, and an unattended little child. So suddenly, these Native American stories, Sonequa, the whole story of the Sonequa, the one with the pursed lips that has a whistling, wailing call. She has these big hands which she puts pine pitch on, because she snatches up the children and throws them into a wicker basket on her back and takes them home for dinner as the main course. But she's very dull-witted, and so in the depiction, she does this and she makes this whoop whoop sound, but because she's a little slow, she falls asleep. And while she's asleep, the children make their escape. They usually get home safely. But it's, you don't make noise.
I see.
It's used as a boogeyman story.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, a just so boogeyman story may have its roots in real.
Yeah. Is there next question? I'm sure this is discussed in the book. Is there a lot of Native American?
It's in the book.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Chapter.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Native Americans talk about this sort of thing, and like there's like a decent amount of Native American evidence of it existing as far as Native American evidence can go.
Oh yes, very much so. It's been problematic to collate it because they're kind of tight-lipped, close to the vest on it.
Yeah.
It's they because as with all other animal figures in their folklore, I won't say mythology, but their folklore. I mean, they create stories, fables, if you will. Aesop's fables. They teach a story, teach a principle rather, but the natural creatures are imbued with personalities, with different characteristics and traits that distinguish them from one another, and so it's no exception with Sasquatch. So the spiritual and the natural are not distinct, but they're blended together in a very seamless way, which is not surprising. But they keep those things kind of to themselves. I've had a few periods of instruction on how the white man's ways are viewed. We mess things up, and then we want to study them and learn about them.
Yes.
So it's been challenging to get. I mean, there are very few efforts. In the book, I was privileged by the generosity of Gail Highpine, who was a native tribal author, who had collected a lot of stories across many different tribes and had brought them together. And they'd never been published really before. It was available, as a PDF online or something, but she gave permission to reprint it in the book. And so it was really the first more synthetic treatment of the topic across cultural lines. Kathy Strain has written an excellent book about cannibals, giants, and Sasquatch, in which she goes through and has just tons and tons and tons of stories.
Yeah.
That all seem to kind of point back to this wild man of the woods figure. So it's there, definitely there. Sometimes it's really visible, like on totem poles and masks.
Yeah.
Other times, not so much. Sometimes in petroglyphs or rock art paintings, like the famous painting down in of the Yokuts in the Sierra Nevada mountains, California, that depicts their creation story, and one of the central figures, proponents of humanity in the story is the hairy man. and here he is right there, and all his glory, along with his wife and child too.
Wow.
That's why we stand upright, because we were created by the hairy man to look more like them than the other animals of the forest.
Oh, Andy's Googling. If you're listening to this, Google all of this. There's some great like images that come up to speak to what Dr. Meldrum's talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So one thing I wanted to talk about, and
I got dibs on the next question.
Okay, I'm gonna pull away from Sasquatch a little bit. So one thing I really admire you about, and my experience in higher education is like you're bucking against the trend here, and I'm sure you've taken some flack for the stance you've taken, but
Yeah.
I mean, you're tenured, so you've made it work, but how much crap have you had to take from people because of this? And I admire you. I admire you for sticking and being true to yourself, and like, that's very cool to see. But I'm assuming you've taken so much shit from people, and
Yeah.
how has that been?
Well, I wouldn't recommend anyone to follow that. I was naive, a bit naive, I guess, or more idealistic than naive, and thought it was just a matter of, if I did good science, it would that
Right.
would speak for itself.
Right.
And boy, was I mistaken.
Yeah. That's a shame, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
No, it was a very, and I've tried my darndest not to become cynical.
Yeah.
I'm afraid Dr. Krantz kind of,
I became super cynical from this stuff, but
yeah, when
like-
you read his book, he referred to the scientific establishment, and there is, but he was kind of sour grapes in the end, and quite jaded, and I can appreciate, as time went on, and things happened, and not just me, but my students were persecuted as well.
oh man.
Yeah.
Merely by association. They weren't
Yeah.
even doing Sasquatch related projects or anything. Because that's not all I do. That's not at all. It's become more and more the focus as I reach, the twilight of my career. I want to make sure I tie up and finish some
Yeah.
projects. And so I am rather focused, but it certainly was not. But to have my students be harassed by other graduate students or faculty,
Yeah, that's terrible.
It really, it got to the point where action was taken.
Really?
Oh yeah, some things came to a head, and some formal grievances were.
Oh
I filed
wow.
some formal grievances, and thankfully had a dean who was, was egalitarian and objective, and stepped in and took the bull by the horns, and cut through the ridiculousness, and and it laid it to rest. But yeah, my promotion, I barely got tenure, and because I was naive and jumped into the deep end before having that security, and my promotion to full professor was delayed because the chair at the time had actually verbalized, as long as he was chair, I would not be promoted to full professor.
Wow.
Jeez.
So we're going to get back to Bigfoot, but props to you, and that takes some balls for doing that. I know bucking against the trend academically is tough to do, even though the whole point of academics is to be progressive and change the way you think based on research. But I do appreciate the fact that you stuck to your guns. That was just a side thing I wanted to ask you about, not Bigfoot related. So we can get back to Sasquatch.
Sure.
All right. What I think, like, one of the biggest pieces of criticism that I've seen is the lack of bones, or the lack of bones that have been found. And you talked a little bit about it in your book. But can you kind of like just kind of cover like how you address that in your book? Because I think it's really interesting for people listening to hear that.
Right. Well, there's two aspects that have to be considered. The one we've kind of alluded to a little bit as we've talked about some of the behaviors and qualities of the natural history of Sasquatch, as can be inferred from the clues that are available, and by extrapolation and bracketing by the anatomy and physiology of known great apes. So that being that they're a large-bodied primate, they're at the top of their food chain, they probably have a long lifespan. If we look at the life expectancy of the other large-bodied great apes and humans, we're talking about 45 to 60 years.
Yeah.
It's only been recently. Humans before, only recently with good nutrition, reliable food, and medication, our lifespan has been extended. I mean, it wasn't too long when 45 years was a ripe old age. But there's also a positive correlation of body mass and longevity. So as this creature is bigger, I wouldn't be surprised if they wouldn't hit 50 to 60 years, and even in the wild.
Yeah.
Under those conditions. So that's one side.
Mm-hmm.
Plus their rarity.
Yeah.
Wrap in there their rarity. And so, a death of an individual Sasquatch in a given area is a real rare event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we, because kind of bearing on that, the notion of rarity, again, I won't go through all the machinations of how I come to this. We've touched on some of the things, making comparisons to social structure, home range size inferences, and what habitat they seem to be correlated with. So take my state of Idaho. If you look at the bear distribution, the range, you look at where there's sufficiently productive habitat, and you look at how many 1,000 square mile plots could you stick in that territory. And of course, just a ballpark would be about 12 to 15. Let's just say 12, and it's going to vary with topography and with patchiness of the forest and habitat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even whether the mountain range faces east, west, or north and south is going to change the flora considerably. And then each of those plots, a dominant male, maybe 2 or 3 females, and a couple offspring. Let's just say 5. Again, keep the math simple. 12 times 5, we can all do that, 60. So in all of Idaho, there's 60 Sasquatch. There's 35,000 black bear.
Oh, wow.
So you start comparing like that. We'll say, oh, well, yeah, but your numbers, way too conservative. Okay, well, let's double it. There's 120 Sasquatch. Well, there's 240. There's still, 1,000 times more.
Yeah.
Or 100 times, a couple hundred times. Kind of the rule of thumb ends up being about 200 black bear for every Sasquatch in a state. And even when you go back east, when you use that rule of thumb I talked about black bear, you also need to keep the numbers in mind too.
Yeah.
So 35,000 in Idaho. There's about 30,000 in Washington State. About the same in Oregon and Northern California. British Columbia, 110,000 black bear.
Oh, wow.
110,000 black bear. But see, that means, so if we just take a 0 off, there's there's more. There's a couple thousand Sasquatch probably in there, but anyway, or a couple hundred. The other side of the conversation about bones has to do with the environment.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is wet coniferous forest habitat. And often, at least in the Pacific Northwest and Intermountain, Idaho, basalt batholith, it's volcanic igneous rock, which tends to contribute to very acidic soils. So if the gnawers and chewers and the porcupines and the squirrels and even the deer, calcium is at a premium, and they'll chew on bones. If they don't make short work of it, what's exposed to the elements and the soil quickly disappears. So, there aren't many people. I was talking to someone on the phone today, actually, and he likes to look for sheds. And so he spends a lot of time off trail walking around, and he finds a lot of bones, and he has quite a little collection he wants to show me pictures of to identify. You don't find very many bones, though, out in the woods. When you think of, that's the number of bear. I don't even know what the number of estimate for deer is in Idaho. but it's in the, probably hundreds of thousands.
Right.
Yeah.
It's huge.
And so how many deer carcasses do you ever find when you're out on a hike?
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Very
mean,
little, and not a whole, unless you just happen upon, and it's usually a roadkill, or someone is shot or left abandoned a wounded animal. Anyway, so that's the issue. Bones are just precious few. So go back to our example of Idaho. Of those, say 120 or 200 of those, let's just say 200 of those 200 Sasquatch in Idaho, how many of them are in their golden years?
Yeah.
On the verge of dying. So how frequently does a Sasquatch die? It's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest, will someone hear it? or does it make a sound? With no one to hear it, will it make a sound? If a Sasquatch dies in Idaho, there's no one to find the bones. Did it really die? But that point is, what are the chances? I mean, it's a needle. It's even worse than a needle in a haystack.
Yeah. I mean, like, how often would you run into like a dead bear?
I was gonna say, I'm trying to think of how many times we've seen bones out there. I mean, we've seen bones.
A deer.
Sure. We've seen a deer,
moose before.
Yeah, but that's about it. Yeah. It doesn't really happen.
Yep. To bottom of the food chain.
Yeah. What I just want to ask this. What other things, I mean, you kind of talked about it. I mean, you didn't talk about the specifics, but what other things are you into researching aside from Sasquatch?
Yeah. Well, like I said, things have tended to kind of zero in now. My research has involved basically, I mean, evolutionary morphology or functional morphology in the broadest sense. So, I've had students that have looked at, and more specifically, hominin bipedalism.
Okay.
So my forte really was, working with the fossil remains of hominin species, but also they're a precious commodity. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you have to come in the back door, the side door. And so my dissertation, for example, I didn't work directly with hominin fossils, but I decided to look at terrestrial Cercopithecine monkeys, the baboon macaque family of monkeys. So my dissertation title was Terrestrial Adaptations in the Feet of African Cercopithecines with Implications for the Interpretation of Hominin Bipedalism.
Oh, nice. I understand most of those words.
I did not understand that.
So basically what I was doing was looking at four-legged, they're quadrupedal, four-footed. We still call it footed even though monkeys have hands.
Yeah.
Four-footed monkeys that walked on the ground, looking at their feet, comparing it with bipedal primates, humans namely, and then what were the common features that could be explained as responsible or as caused by walking on the ground versus a narrow centrally placed substrate. And what was left then were the distinctions for walking on the ground on 2 feet instead of 4. Oh, okay. And so it really highlighted the human adaptation, the arched foot, etc. The lack of divergence of the big toe and so on. So I've done that kind of stuff. During my postdoc, since I was the foot guy.
You were at Northwestern. I read your CV.
I was at at one time I was at Northwestern. I did my doctoral at Stony Brook, SUNY Stony Brook, and then I did a postdoc at Duke.
That's right.
While I was working on my doctorate, my professor came back from South America, and he said, "Hold out your hand." And I held out my hand, and he dropped a handful of ankle bones, monkey ankle bones in my hand. He said, "You're the foot guy. Tell me what." So I went from African to South American. So I became an expert on the ankle bones of South American monkeys. You could hand me a monkey ankle bone, you still can, from South America, and I can tell you which group it came
Nice.
from. Literally, there's differences, and they're correlated with their locomotion.
Yeah, right.
So I could then extrapolate what these fossil forms were doing, even if we couldn't identify the actual species quite yet. But with a little sleuthing, we were able to associate. So I had a whole exposure to South American primates when I postdoced at Duke, I realized when I first started my doctoral work, I was more interested in the living models rather than the fossil. But as I soon realized, you can't separate the two. I mean, it's the form function phylogeny triangle, and the evolutionary history has a huge impact on the expression of mechanical responses of the body to different selection pressures. Anyway, I realized if I really wanted to have any role in paleontology, you had to know something about teeth too, because it was teeth that helped you to identify. So totally new to me, I jumped in the deep end, and it was fortunate because the person, my mentor as a postdoc, was the leading expert on teeth.
Oh, really?
And so I spent hours and hours at a stereoscopic microscope with a drawing tube sketching the teeth of New World monkeys, because then I went with his team down and we prospected for monkey fossils in South America. So I had a big hand in South American New World monkey evolution. But I've had students here. Then when I went to Northwestern, well, actually before I went to Northwestern, while I was there, my mentor came back and, trying to sort out the New World monkeys evolved so rapidly in South America. When you have very rapid radiation, very short span of shared branches on the tree, there aren't a lot of characteristics that help you distinguish which are the nearest neighbors, because they have shared so little time in common. And so creating or recreating their evolutionary relationships was quite challenging based on the fossil evidence alone, and so and the morphology. So this was the age of where DNA was going to answer everything. So he said, "How would you like to learn to sequence DNA?" I go, I kept switching hats. I just switched the skeletal hat to the dental hat, and now he wants to do DNA. But how could I say no? It's a great opportunity. So I got farmed out to another lab and shackled to a bench.
So you did a bunch of agarose gels, didn't you?
Doing DNA extractions and sequencing. And so when I went to Northwestern, I set up my lab to continue that. I was originally going to, I did. The 2.5 years I was there, we were doing DNA sequencing. When I came here to ISU, I set up my lab that way, but it was harder. I mean, the teaching ratio to research here, I like it, but at Northwestern, I basically taught one course,
right?
And that was team taught, so I had all day, all year to conduct research, basically. And here I was suddenly the South American monkeys became the sexy thing to do, and all these big high-powered labs with lots of postdocs and lots of graduate students and lots of funding were jumping on board, and they became, sequencing mills. I couldn't keep up.
That's great. I've done some of that stuff. So I know COVID might have sidetracked you for this year, but I know normally you're going out into the bush for like a long durations. Are you planning on doing that this year?
Well, it will depend. And if I do, I'm a little different strategy.
Yeah.
There are still travel restrictions, and if we do travel, we have to quarantine when we get back, and so yada yada. It's kind of made it problematic. But my next push, and I've talked about this elsewhere. It got the wind was taken from the sails by COVID, and so it's been delayed. But did you happen to catch the news about the study of Loch Ness recently?
No, but I saw you were talking about this.
I saw that. I was.
Inform us.
Well, there was an international team that did a biodiversity survey of the waters of Loch Ness by sampling waters at various levels. And of course, when they do this, they concentrate. They run a lot of water through these filtering systems and gather up the trace DNA that's there, that's shed by the organisms that live in the water and live next to the water, that pee in the water, and whatever, poop in the water. And their final conclusion was that there was an unusual eel.
Really?
And that the Loch Ness Monster may be explained by an unrecognized giant eel, freshwater eel.
This literally leads into
this.
my next question of, in terms of cryptozoology, like what else is at least somewhat legit? So maybe the Loch Ness Monster. Anything else?
Well, it's just not a plesiosaur is all, but
yeah.
But so
it's an eel. That's not as sexy. That's not as sexy.
The point of this story is that one of that professor, the lead professor, Dr. Gimmel, who's from New Zealand, one of his students is doing a postdoc at UC Davis in genetics, and he was up at Yellowstone and visiting, and the park there, and he was a big fan of the work I've done on Sasquatch, and so he, before returning to Davis, he phoned me up and said, "Hey, I'm in the neighborhood. Yellowstone's just a couple hours north of me. Could I pop in for a visit?" Well, I said yes, because I had these concerns about the roadblocks to genetics study, DNA analysis of Sasquatch samples. I felt that we weren't sampling extensively enough, or weren't sequencing extensively enough in order to find those few markers that would distinguish us. I mean, if we're talking about a hominin that may only differ by 1% of its DNA, the example I've used to help illustrate this, imagine you had an Advents calendar, but instead of 24 little windows, little doors, there was thousands of them.
Yeah.
And you want, and behind one of those doors is the marker that distinguishes Sasquatch from human in that sample. But your study, your funding at the time only allows you to open 10 doors of the 1,000. So what are the odds that you're going to find that one marker? And if you don't, what conclusion did you arrive at? Well, everything you witnessed is exactly like human.
Yeah.
So it's either contamination or it's misidentified human sample. Well, the third possibility is you haven't tested enough to draw any reliable conclusion. And I presented this to this student, and he Tom was his name, and Tom said, "You're absolutely right. If it were me, we would sequence the entire mitochondrial genome, which is circular. We would also sample at least a dozen, maybe 2 nuclear genes before we could even say anything about the prospects of it being human or distinct from human." So that's one of the problems that we're up against. So anyway, so we had this conversation, and he said, and I also told him, I said, I've reached out to numerous labs, good quality labs that are doing work on great ape taxonomy using DNA, collected from nest sites or from scat and so forth. And but invariably they come back and say, well, it sounds fascinating, but no, we can't do it. And the reason is because they can't afford to just be distracted with a project that's controversial like this. It'll potentially taint their credibility. But it's publish or perish. These competition for funding is immense. And so you have to be producing. So if they didn't get a publication out of that, it's wasted time and effort. And may cost a graduate student their thesis and blah, 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 And so he said, well, you should talk to my mentor, this Tom says. He said, it's Tom Gimmel or Neil Gimmel. And I didn't recognize the name right off the bat. The guy who did the eDNA study of Loch Ness. Like, oh, this is perfect. What a hook, too, for fundraising.
Yeah.
The guy who found Loch Ness is now going to look for Sasquatch,
That's true.
And so he put me in contact with him, and Neil and I have corresponded, and Neil's excited. I'm excited. We just got to get the funding now, and we've got to get past COVID.
Yeah.
So we can travel.
You're getting close.
Yeah. I was curious. Like, I mean, when you go out in the woods for a while, like what do these like expeditions kind of look like? Like you're just out there looking for tracks. Like what are you looking for?
Well, it varies. It varies under the circumstances and our wherewithal and where exactly we're working. Because you've got to you've got to kind of cast your net broadly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's like one of the guys I worked with, you know, he was a project manager for a big firm. And, you know, if they had a new facility, he would get the funding lined up. He would get the materials lined up. He'd get the personnel lined up, the plan, and then you get it done. And he was used to that.
Yeah.
He was good at that. So when he turned his attention to Bigfoot, you know, he had the funds. He contacted me, you know, to be part of the personnel and help with the planning. He had some people working with him. He had all the bells and whistles, and his intent was we're going to go out there on a weekend and get it done.
A weekend.
Wow.
A weekend. That's
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Get him to stay for very long, but one time we were going up to a site. We picked out a site. He said, "Pick a site out in Idaho." And so I had not spent much time in central Idaho doing this. So we picked a spot. Unfortunately, we had to evacuate because of the fires.
Yeah.
That particular year. But as he picked me up, I didn't take a vehicle that time. We were kind of conserving on vehicles. It was going to be a quick and dirty trip in and 2 or 3 weeks in and get out. But anyway, he turns to me and he says, "So Jeff, what are our chances?" I said, "Well, hey, let's stop at the Circle K or the shop and go or whatever and buy a couple lotto tickets, and I'll tell you." Chances. I said, "You know, you've got to recognize it. You didn't quite get this. This is different than one of your projects. We can have all these everything lined up. We can be absolutely prepared. All our equipment can work perfectly, which hardly ever happens. Batteries will stay charged, you know, blah blah blah." And if there's not a Sasquatch in that drainage that we've chosen for very good reasons, you know, probably, hopefully, if the Sasquatch happens to be in the next drainage over, he might as well be on the far side of the moon. We'll never see him. We'll never bump into him.
Right.
So that's the challenge of doing field work like this.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've used the old standbys. We've deployed camera traps. We've tried deploying hair snags. We've used odorants. I had, you know, I think it was one of the Ohio zoos. I had a director of a zoo who was very intrigued by my request and had one of their keepers collect female orangutan urine. And we used that on one occasion. You know, but boy, it's a challenge. Nothing. Well, I shouldn't say nothing. I have found footprints on a half a dozen occasions. We've heard vocalizations on a couple of occasions. I've had my camp visited, my backpack rifled, and food stores taken.
Really?
Yeah. Backpack clasps undone and opened, and contents, you know, ditty bags pulled, you know, stuff bags pulled open in search of food, and no claw marks, no teeth marks. I've had something run by my tent and drag its hand on the.
That was in the book.
That scared the shit out of me.
That was in the book.
So those I had some experiences like that. I may have caught a glimpse. You know, it was in association with someone that is very controversial, and so that immediately taints the experience.
Yeah.
I was looking through a night vision monocular, which is not ideal because you have, you know, no depth of vision. And it was very dark night. It didn't have an IR illuminator associated with it, you know, just the ambient light of the campfire. And something broke. Well, we'd heard something, the vocalization, and then something stomping around the camp, breaking brush as it went. Sounded like a bull elk, you know, it was big. And breaking branches, you know, not just stepping on twigs, but of branches. And then it broke from the shadows inside of my night vision and went across the road to the other side. And but just a fleeting glimpse. They found they found a trackway where there was broken brush and compressed grass and so forth, but the ground was too hard and the roadbed was too hard to pick up any footprints to substantiate it. But we had seen footprints, I would say. We had seen 13 and a half inch footprints in the moss. I mean, the whole forest floor is like a green carpet.
Right.
With moss that's like a 3-inch memory foam. And if you're heavy enough, and that's just it, our footprints would eventually rebound.
Yeah.
We're compressed completely down to the ground and bigger than any of our boots.
That's crazy. I feel like you just glossed over all the personal anecdotes of you out there in the woods.
It's some interesting experiences.
Do you have any other? We kind of ignored the audience.
Well, truthfully, I was looking through the chat, and all the legitimate questions. The legitimate questions were actually being answered quite well, actually. Yeah.
All I'm gonna say is if you need some extra hands next time you
need
out
like
there,
somebody to like mind camp and make eggs in the morning,
and we can video document the whole thing. We're your guys. But sir, I do want to really thank you for taking the time to talk to us. This was really fun.
Yeah. And giving up your Friday evening for us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to ask you to stay on the line. I'm going to end the stream. Thank everybody for watching.
Yeah, and sorry about the technology issues.
We got that fixed. I don't know what that was, but they're fixed now. Check
there
out.
was no interruption in your image to me. So
Yeah, and you came across fine the whole time.
Yeah. So it
Please,
makes sense that your broadcast was uninterrupted too.
And please,
yeah, we're under attack.
I didn't think about that.
I didn't think about that. Yeah. Please check out. We have links to his book down. If you want to know more about the science behind this, please check it out.
I checked out the book and it was awesome. I really enjoyed it.
We're going to ask you to stay on the line, but everyone else, we will see everybody later on the next BSing.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us in the chat.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see everybody later. All right. End it.